Happy St. Patrick's Day! Not surprisingly, St. Patrick's Day is a national holiday in Ireland. But over the years, it has become a lot more, and in some ways, it's gotten a lot weirder. So, how exactly did we get from here to here? Of course, the feast day of St. Patrick has been celebrated for centuries, with church services mainly. This Saint's Day first became a public holiday, though, in 1903, under the influence of the Nationalists, with the first parade being held in Waterford that very same year. By 1916, there were dozens of annual parades held all across Ireland. These parades were largely organized by a group known as the Irish Volunteers. Also in 1916, this same group would launch the Easter Rising against British forces all across the island. That's just a month after St. Patrick's Day, so the contrast is pretty stark. Well, despite the troubles and the upheavals of the following years, St. Patrick's Day remained an important event. It may surprise you to know that from 1921 to 1961, the sale of alcohol was banned in Ireland in order to maintain the religiosity of the day. That's a really stark contrast to how we tend to celebrate today, have to admit. Okay, so I hear you saying, wait a minute, I know we were celebrating St. Patrick's Day before 1903 here in the States. And right you are. The first St. Patrick's Day celebrations in what would become the United States predate the nation by over 150 years. They even predate the first English colony at Jamestown by 6 years. The very first St. Patrick's Day celebrations were actually held in St. Augustine, part of Spanish Florida at the time. St. Augustine is actually the longest continually inhabited European settlement in the continental US. The deeply Catholic Spanish acknowledged many saints' days, including St. Patrick's. However, this day wasn't actually celebrated until 1600, when Padre Ricardo led the first celebration. You see, Padre Ricardo Arturo wasn't actually Spanish, he was Irish. He was born in Limerick, Richard Arthur, a former soldier who moved to Spanish America and became a priest. Arthur brought the traditions of his home to St. Augustine, so a year after he arrived, he organized the first St. Patrick's Day there. This recently discovered information makes St. Augustine's the oldest St. Pat's celebration in the New World. That takes the title away from Boston. However, the celebrations in St. Augustine wouldn't last. When Padre Arturo died, the festivities died with him. Okay, I admit that was a bit of a switcheroo, a bit of a red herring, not what you expected me to talk about, but I think it's a good point to make that there was once a huge difference between honoring St. Patrick and honoring being Irish. The first recorded celebration in the 13 colonies was in 1737 in Boston. Then there was a parade that we know of in New York in 1762. My own home, the great city of Philadelphia, wasn't far behind, holding our first St. Pat's celebration in 1771. In each of these cases, most of the organizers were Irish expats and Irishmen serving in the British Army, basically all homesick for the home country. Now, as you well know, in the 19th century, wave after wave of Irish immigrants came to these shores, often at great risk. This diaspora was often met with severe prejudice, but they remained proud as a people and also maintained some strong connections to the home country. And marking St. Patrick's Day was highly important to them. It was a way for them to boost their morale and also show off their commitment to coming here to live the American dream. Not surprisingly, some of the celebrations were mounted by groups like the Fenian Brotherhood, an organization that raised money, to say the least, for Irish nationalists back home. And this is another important distinction at this time. Right now, you could probably say that St. Patrick's Day was mainly just for the Irish. But as the 20th century approached and acceptance of the Irish progressed and they became more established, more and more non-Irish folks got exposure to the culture. And from here on out, the partying got a lot wilder and a lot weirder. So when you think about St. Patrick's Day, one of the first cliches that comes to mind is probably this little trick right here. But the thing that gets me, which I didn't realize before we started filming this, is that this goes back a lot longer than you might think. The first person to make green beer for St. Patrick's Day probably did it around 1910. The first evidence we have is a newspaper article from March 17th, 1910 in Spokane, Washington, where the paper recommended that if you really wanted some green beer, you could get yourself some at the First Avenue Bar. On the East Coast, many people credit one Thomas H. Curtin with the idea. He was a physician who made the stuff for his social club in New York sometime around 1914. Not even Prohibition could stop the green tide. In 1926, the Washington Post labeled it an anomalous concoction. That's actually pretty good advertising if you ask me. This was easy to make and easy to make money from. So green beer was now tradition. Did they adopt it in Ireland? Well, God forbid. Of course they didn't. What? Oh, they did. Ah. Okay. Speaking of dyeing things, we Americans don't stop with beer. We are thrilled to color anything not green, green. Food, clothing, lights, that's all easy. But in 1962, some clever boots in Chicago said, "Hey, hold my beer," and took on a whole river. See, back then, city sewage workers used bright green vegetable dye to check pipes for leaks into the river. And, well, you get the idea. On St. Patrick's Day in 1962, into the drink went 100 pounds of green dye. Hey, that's pretty cool. How long is it going to be green like that? All day? All week? How many weeks? Nobody in charge was actually all that upset, but things have calmed down since. Nowadays, they only use a meager 40 pounds of dye, so the effect only lasts for a few hours. A tip of the hat to the mischievous Butler and Rowan families who have carried on this proud tradition for the past 50 years. You want something to go with your green beer? How about some nice corned beef and cabbage? Just remember, this staple of the holiday is uniquely American. It was started by Irish immigrants living on the East Coast. Being largely poor, these immigrants were unable to create a popular dish from Ireland of the time, bacon and cabbage. Corned beef was a common preserved meat aboard shipping vessels, and it became a cheap substitute for those wishing to maintain a connection with their home. Here's the point. We have always made a holiday that works for us based on our local circumstances. So, that said, how does St. Patrick's Day look in other parts of the world? Ireland and the United States are far from the only places that celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Long before the modern age and modern media, the Irish diaspora brought the holiday with them to a number of places, even some you might not expect. Take, for example, this place, the tiny Mediterranean island of Malta. This small nation in the middle of the Mediterranean, just off the coast of Italy, has a long-running St. Patrick's Day celebration dating back nearly 100 years, despite not having a large Irish population. So what's the deal? Well, Malta was part of the British Empire from 1813 to 1964, and served as an important military base. Starting in 1902, this base became the home of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, one of the Irish regiments of the British Army. The Irish soldiers stationed in the towns of Floriana and Spinola naturally celebrated their culture and their holiday. The tradition stuck, and Maltese people still flock today to Floriana and Spinola to party on the 17th. For Maltese, it's mostly an occasion for strong drink, which sounds familiar. However, they still fondly remember the Irish soldiers who brought St. Patrick's Day to their island. Speaking of tropical islands, let's talk about Montserrat, a small island in the Caribbean known as the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. This one's a little warm. Montserrat, home to just around 5,000 people, has deep Irish roots thanks to the first settlers on the island being Irish. As the colony became established, even more Irish moved to Montserrat from other British colonies, such as Virginia. And by 1700, nearly 70% of the island's white population was Irish, earning it the nickname the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. Montserrat's flag even features an Irish harp. For hundreds of years, the people of the island have celebrated the holiday, making it an intrinsic part of Montserrat's culture. In fact, Montserrat is the only place in the world other than Ireland where St. Patrick's Day is a national holiday. The festivities, by the way, last like 7 to 10 days. This is a serious party. Montserrat's celebrations are incredibly unique compared to everywhere else in the world. This is largely due to the diverse population of the island. In addition to the Irish settlers, a large population of enslaved people were brought to the island to work on newly established sugar and tobacco plantations back in the day. As dependence on slave labor grew, so did social unrest. It came to a head on St. Patrick's Day in 1768, when a group of enslaved people planned to stage a revolt, taking advantage of the holiday drunkenness. However, word got out and 9 rebels were hanged. Eventually freedom was won, so today St. Patrick's Day is a day of remembrance as well as celebration for the island's Afro-Caribbean population, which is now 90% of the total population. Typical St. Patrick's Day customs take on an additional island flair. Parades feature traditional Irish instruments alongside steel drums. Caribbean-style masquerade dancing tells the story of the failed rebellion, while also practicing traditional Irish jigs. Montserrat's St. Patrick's Day celebration is ultimately the story of two peoples with distinct shared histories. We're obviously on a bit of an island trend, so let's keep going. This time, let's go to an island that is just a touch larger: Japan. Annually, Japan hosts around 15 St. Patrick's Day parades across the country. Why? How? Well, to figure that out, let's back up a little bit first. Sorry for the detour, but I think this is important to point out. Despite what you may have heard about the Irish hating how Americans have ruined or cheapened the holiday, it just isn't so. If you're looking for a really big St. Pat's blowout, parade, green beer, music, the whole shillelagh, you need look no further than Old Dublin. The fact is, the Irish have been partying on St. Pat's for decades and have bolted on anything about the holiday that struck their fancy. You can go to church, sure. Have a small family gathering, great. Music at the pub? Check. Quasi-pagan Celtic festival vibe? Yeah, they got that too. And since the mid-1990s, the Irish government has used St. Patrick's Day as a way to celebrate and showcase Irish culture for the rest of the world, and thus, Japan. The first St. Patrick's Day parade in Japan was held in 1992 thanks to the efforts of the Irish Embassy. Now, the Japanese love a good excuse for a party. Ask me later about how they celebrate Christmas and Halloween. The Tokyo event has been so successful that a few years back it was actually expanded into the I Love Ireland Festival, held in Yoyogi Park, and it culminates in a massive parade up and down Omotesando Street. Around 130,000 people attend to enjoy actually really authentic entertainment. It's the largest St. Patrick's Day celebration in all of Asia. And I have to say, I would love to go myself. So, why should we limit St. Patrick's Day celebrations to Earth, though, huh? That's right, this holiday has actually gone to outer space. You can't keep a good Irishman down, or on the planet for that matter. Astronauts on the International Space Station like to express their heritage even if the nearest pub is 400 kilometers below them. On the 17th, the station will usually post photos of the Emerald Isle as seen from space. Additionally, several astronauts have taken it upon themselves to add a little something extra to the annual tribute. During her time aboard the ISS, Irish-American astronaut Catherine Coleman brought along two instruments, a flute and a tin whistle, that were lent to her by members of the Irish band, the Chieftains. She played both instruments for St. Patrick's Day while aboard the station in 2011. Her performance was even included on the Chieftains' last studio album. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield, who you might know from his viral rendition of David Bowie's Space Oddity,
is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade, and the papers want to...
has also participated in the festivities. Chris has used his very limited luggage space to bring some green clothes into space to wear just for St. Patrick's Day. He's even used his musical talents by singing Danny Boy aboard the station. Side note, if you'd like to learn more about this unofficial Irish anthem, we do have a video about that as well. So what have we learned today, kids? Well, it's obviously that St. Patrick's Day as a holiday wears many hats. You know, dumb jokes aside. What was my takeaway from making this video? It was basically that St. Patrick's Day is a big deal, and when I say that, I mean that it means different things to a lot of people. The bottom line is that we are doing this in order to celebrate Irish culture and to have an occasion for joy. I mean, it's not a mistake that this holiday happens at the beginning of spring, right? So however you choose to celebrate is fine. For years, I've been here selling traditional stuff to people who want to do it in a traditional way. But if you want to put on plastic beads, go ahead. Know a little bit about Irish culture first, appreciate the good stuff, but appreciate the time with your friends most of all. That is what this is really about. It's about being celebratory of being alive. And if you have Irish heritage, so much the better. So, until next time, thank you for watching. May the road rise to meet you.